Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And I got to tell you, I am more personally excited about a conversation we're about ready to have here with Tracy Hansen than I've had in a long time, because we're going to take on some of the biggest challenges that as B2B C-suite executives that we have to create long-term sustainable growth in the business. We're going to not only identify what those challenges are, why they're there, but maybe a few tips on what we could be doing, because that's exactly what Tracy does every single day. In fact, you've spent the last 5 years specifically working with hundreds of companies, B2B companies, on their go-to-market strategy, right? You're also a 3-time B2B CMO. You've been a former president of a company. So you've held executive positions where you haven't been just the consultant, you've been responsible, you've been accountable, right? So the two sides of that table, I think, is very important. You're also a little bit of an adventure junkie. You're traveling, you've gone to all the 50 states, all the national parks, you're now hitting every single continent, but you do everything from snowmobiling to hiking to rock climbing in the Himalayas. Unfortunately, but it gave you a lot of time to reflect. You broke both feet and spent months in bed this last year. Please tell us a bit more about Tracy and your background, and then we'll dig right in.
It's so nice to be here, and I'm delighted to be with you today. Indeed, I broke both my feet, but I'll tell you that story after I share a little bit about my role as partner at SBI. So I've been at SBI Growth Advisory for about 5 years. Before that, I was a client of theirs, and before that, I was on their advisory board. I've seen it from all different angles, and having been an operator gives me a very strong perspective about what it means to actually take go-to-market strategies and implement them. So it's been fantastic. SBI has been around for about 20 years. We focus on helping companies make their number, and that can take any number of different approaches. And whether it's a small $20 million company all the way up to a $6 billion, $7 billion company, we've seen it all. And I'm delighted to share some of the big learnings I've had and to talk to you about the research that we've been doing.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to jump right in there, because when you and I first met and we started talking, we realized that we both had a lot of the same passions about go to market and what are the biggest challenges. It came out of working with hundreds and hundreds of B2B organizations. And I interview on this podcast. We're getting ready to go over within a month 300 interviews with B2B C-suite executives. I've asked the last 100 plus the question on, what do you feel for a B2B ABM go-to-market strategy? What do you think are the two greatest challenges for creating long-term sustainable growth? We're going to talk about the top 3. I'm going to preface it as one thing. They are all internal challenges. In fact, out of the top 10 challenges, 9 out of the 10 were 100% internal or internal-external hybrid, but the step number 1 to addressing them was internal. So basically, however we want to politically say it, we're our own greatest block to long-term sustainable growth, right?
And we see it over and over again.
So I
Every
want to take
time.
the number 1. This was 72% of the people that I talked to, the C-suite executives, said the internal alignment was the number 1 challenge to creating long-term sustainable growth. And I'd love to just hear from your experience and wisdom about that. How do you frame it? How do you think about solving it?
Absolutely. So when we go into client businesses, we often are given the problem. They tell us this is the problem, whether it's we don't have the right quota, we don't have the right top of funnel, we're missing territory alignment, the quotas are wrong, whatever challenge they give to us. One of the very first things we do is ask the executive team to take an alignment study. It's very quick, but it allows us to understand across the C-suite, are they seeing things the same way? And similar to the results that you see, we see the exact same thing. 72, 74% of companies are not aligned across the C-suite. It's not that they're not thinking along the same lines. It's often they're not thinking about the same way to approach it, or they're looking at it through their own lens. So if I'm a CFO, I'm looking at it through a finance perspective. If I'm a CRO, I'm looking at it through a sales perspective, and so on down the C-suite. So when they come to the table with their point of view, their metrics, their data, and they're trying to have a conversation about it, they're talking about the same problem, but they're not talking about it from a holistic or company viewpoint, which then creates misalignment, Even though they can all know their head at the table, when they go back to their respective functions, they're still solving for their function, which then creates even more misalignment down deeper into the organization. It is almost universal
You said a
today.
number of things that were really important there, but you nodded to the fact that, like, you leave the meeting, you go back, and we're all in our own different departments. And if we're head of sales with a CRO, we've got most likely a quota short term over our head. For the CMO, we're looking for long term sustainability of the business and the brand, which is a trust mark, and building that, as well as short pipeline development. If I'm the CPO, I'm looking at the product that I'm creating and what's going to do. And I'm listening to sales. They're saying, if we could just have this, we could just have this. Everybody has their own point of view. How do we bring it together? Because I know you've worked on solving alignment problems and not just identifying them, but give us the tips for if I'm the CEO or anybody in the C suite, how do we solve for this? How do we solve this challenge, this problem?
Oh, I want to share a couple of ideas, and I hope that we'll get some comments from the listeners here who might add to them. But one of the things that's super important, especially at the CEO level, is to treat the executive team like a team, not a collection of function heads. As soon as everybody comes to the table thinking specifically about their function versus thinking about it as a team and as a collective group trying to solve for the business problem, you end up with this misalignment problem. Treat the team like a team, not function heads. And as a team member, come to the table as a team member, not a function head. It doesn't mean that you don't have expertise in your function. You absolutely do. The team analogy plays out here. Everybody knows their role, but the best teams know how to interoperate together and what needs to happen as a collective. The second thing, Steve, that we recommend and we often help our companies implement are building management operating systems, not cadences of meetings. All too frequently, we'll go into the company and they'll say, well, we meet once a month and we have these weekly get togethers and so forth. That's interesting, but a well built system defines how priorities are set, how decisions are made, where accountability sits, and where leaders need to scale in order to drive the business forward. So think less about meeting cadence and more about operating systems. And then the third thing that is really interesting, and I'm super excited. I'm going on site to a client next week who has this exact problem. The leadership team is actually bringing in the extended leaders into this conversation. The real influence on how things get executed in the field and in different departments happens one or two levels down. So by embracing more than just the 6 or 7 C-suite executives into conversations, but pulling in the expertise and the thinking of the extended leadership team can broaden and deepen alignment faster than almost anything else.
First
You
off,
know.
I love the way that you started there, the team analogy. We've heard it in a lot of applications, but here's what I took away from that. I'm not like the biggest sports fan or everything, but it made me think of the C suite isn't like a football team. It's not 40, 50, 70, 80 people on the roster. The C suite team is usually 5, 6 members. It made me think of the NBA, right? Where somebody's the guard, somebody's the center, somebody's the forward. They have very defined roles. But if they aren't playing well together, not that's why assists are one of the key stats. How do you get the team to assist each other? Because without that, it's not gonna be a team.
That is a great question and $1 million question. And actually, I think it comes up with one of the other things we're going to talk about, and that's building trust. Trust often comes with the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand their perspective. It is the ability to see beyond your own NBOs and own KPIs to know how your activities will affect downstream the next person. You actually said something that clicks for me, and I see it all the time as well. Sales is working on a quarterly goal. Marketing activities typically take months, quarters, even years to have impact. And if you're not able to see both of those and you have expectations about in quarter activities from a team that takes months to stand something up, even with AI, it still takes time for things to resonate in market. You're not going to have trust and you're not going to have alignment. So being able to understand what role each person has, the constraints that they're working in, and how your expectations can be best met and served by that other person is incredibly powerful to creating team alignment and to driving team behavior. I'm terrible with basketball, so I don't know all the positions. I do know baseball really well, so if you'll afford me that, I know that when you are doing certain plays, the first baseman can cover the second base, or the shortstop can cover second base. The pitcher can cover the catcher because they know the mechanics of what needs to be done in each of those different positions and they practice for it and they understand it. And that's what I think about what needs to happen at the C suite to gain alignment. I need to understand as a CMO the constraints and the pressures and the challenges that my CRO is facing, and likewise CRO to CMO. Oftentimes, dude, I see it work really well when companies are growing fast and they're executing well. Everybody forgives everything. But when you're missing your number, when you're not sure why things aren't going as smoothly as you thought they would, people start to demand more from others when they can't possibly deliver it. So, clarity up front, clear expectation setting, understanding what the other person's constraints are, it are the things that I would suggest are super critical.
You told me a short story before we started recording about a CFO that you just met with. Not gonna have to name any names or anything like that, but what was the issue that the CFO brought up to you that eroded alignment, like, very quickly, very easily?
Yeah, super great company, and I'm excited to be working with them. They have clear goals and objectives, and they are super attracted to the shiny object. So even when they think they all know what they're going to go do, something pops up, a new product feature, a company that's not necessarily in their ideal customer profile set, a new business opportunity that hadn't even existed 6 months ago when they came up with their annual strategy. The team will student body right to whatever that shiny object is, leaving their agreed upon strategy in the dust. And then when they realize that shiny object maybe didn't quite work out the way they thought it was, they come back to their strategy, but now they're that much further delayed. And in the process, they've created chaos and confusion with the execution teams below them. So it is one of the things that we're going to be talking about next week. We're bringing in the whole group, including those extended leaders that I talked about, to exactly address this problem. What are the mechanics that we can put in place to avoid chasing the shiny object as a complete company while staying focused on the agreed upon strategy, leaving room for new opportunities, leaving room for things that just simply didn't exist
Oh,
six
man,
months
the
ago.
shiny object. We've all chased that, right?
Sure.
So, I have to
Oh,
ask this
yeah.
question. Where does accountability come into the picture in terms of gaining and keeping, and despite shiny objects and all the other things, our own POVs and mandates in our own departments? Where does accountability come into this, and who holds that accountability?
I think each leader holds some level of accountability, but at the end of the day, it is the CEO who has the ultimate accountability. It sounds very easy. So, a CEO is the general manager, the coach, the person that is making sure that every player knows where they need to be at all times. The designing for a team, not just assembling a group of people, is what I see most successful CEOs doing. So when CEOs are thinking about, I need a team of people who can operate together, who can work together, who can mediate any challenges that may present themselves amongst the team members, it's a game changer. It is literally saying, instead of I'm hiring that person for that skill and I'm hiring that person for that skill, I'm hiring these people because together we are better and can operate as one. At the end of the day, who's accountable? To me, it's the CEO or president, whatever that title is for a particular business. Below the CEO, though, each member has to be accountable for their KPIs, for driving the outcomes that they've agreed to. But they first need to be aligned to driving the outcomes for the business and then their function. Accountability, when done that way, results in transformative companies.
I think we could probably spend 2 hours on the alignment topic here, but I wanna move on because there's, like, the top 3. They're so important. So another one that came out that you live with every single day too, number 2 challenge that the C-suite executives voiced was a lack of deep understanding of the voice of the customer. And part of the reason why it came out as the number two is that by having a sales function and a customer success function and product talking to customers, that we're talking to them, that those aren't siloed and that somehow they magically roll up and it's the true understanding. And so, absolutely, we're customer first, we're customer driven, right? But McKinsey came out with a study a few years back and said that only 15% of companies actually execute well on a voice of customer program. Voice of the customer can be one of the most important ways that we align because that's the North Star. That's the highest voice of authority in the business. How do you see the challenge of voice of the customer impact on the business and how do we solve for that? How do we actually feel like we actually have the true voice of the customer and execute on it? That's a big question.
If we could spend 2 hours talking about alignment, we could probably talk 4 hours about voice of customer. All right. So this is another thing that we see all the time, and we're often called in to assist with the voice of customer. The thing about voice of customer is, and McKinsey's, I think they nailed the research there. It's often done as a research project by a group that is the most disconnected from the strategy of the business, right? It's NPS dashboards, it's quick usability studies on one feature because of somebody's pet project, right? It's not a strategic asset that the company can use to drive the overall business approach. Okay, so let me break this down. What I see is 4 things that the best companies do. The first one is executives own the customer conversation directly. They don't outsource customer conversations to a group in the organization. They're out there talking to the customer, living in and understanding what their customers are experiencing. And it raises the bar and for the culture of a company when the whole company sees the CEO and the CRO and the CMO out in front of customers. I can't tell you, see how many SKOs I've been to, SKO sales kickoff meetings I've been to, where no customer is invited to go on stage and talk about their experience with the brand. Bringing the customer into the conversation just isn't part of the DNA of so many companies. There's one thing for you. Get your next SKO, get your customer on stage talking about their experiences with you. The next thing is win loss input is often treated as a sales function. But when you do and structure win loss conversations in an effective way, what you hear, what you learn is why somebody chose you. What was it about your message, your product, their interactions with your sales force during their customer buying journey becomes really interesting and insightful data for the team to act on. Yes, it's a celebration if you win, but more importantly, the nuggets of information about the why become critical data sets for you to act upon. Equally important, the loss data. Why did you lose? Why did they pick a competitor? There are so many things that can come out of that. It's not an afterthought. It's not a nice to have. It's an integral part in creating a voice of customer as a input to what you're trying to do. The other thing that I see the best companies doing is moving from satisfaction metrics to buying behavior signals. NPS tells you what a customer feels, and it's typically done in the context of a customer interaction with a support ticket of some kind. It doesn't tell you why they expanded their purchases with you, why they churned their purchases with you, and it doesn't tell you how you can actually correlate their experiences to NRR growth, net retention growth. There's something about just moving away from I'm satisfied with you to really understanding their behaviors that changes how voice of customer can drive change in the organization. And then the last thing that I think people need to think about as voice of customer is change as voice of customer as a change management tool. When you're driving the conversation and you're listening to what the customer is doing, it can help the company determine, do we need to change our product? Do we need to change our customer support? Do we need to change our marketing and messaging? Or being told the customer is telling me this versus the leadership wants me to change it. Using voice of customer as a tool to make changes to your strategy, to your company direction is very powerful. So I'll stop there. Those are the 4 things I
Well,
see the best companies
as you
doing.
can tell, I'm writing down notes and I got the transcript. I'm so excited about this. So, a couple of things. First off, underpinning all of this is a dedication to gathering the voice of the customer. I'll give you an example. I talk to a lot of CMOs. When they come onto a new job, almost all of them, they pick up the phone, they do a Zoom call, and they say, "Hey, I'm the new CMO here. It's not a sales conversation. I'm literally just trying to learn." And they'll learn and they'll learn and they'll learn, and then they will stop and then they don't do it anymore. Why? They're the chief marketing officer. They got 128% of what they can do in any day to do the thing that is going to be critical to answering that board question that came in, the mandate the CEO gave you, alignment with the CRO, building the right team, you name it, right? We have so much to do, whatever C suite position. So we don't do it. I didn't mean to make this like a sports analogy thing, but remember the tagline from Nike, just do it? It has to rise to the level, just like alignment. Everything you were saying there has to rise to the level of importance, is what I'm taking away from the conversation here. When you're laying out your strategic plan, alignment has to be one of the top points. How we're going to guarantee it, how we're really going to get a true, deep understanding of the voice of the customer. If we're not talking about these two things in our strategic, what's our plan for next year? How are we on track? If those aren't part of the conversation, we've already lost the war on our strategic plan. Okay, that was one of my biggest takeaways from there.
Something that you said struck me, and I feel it and I know what's happening. I'm a new CMO. I've done this. Like I've literally done it. I want to talk to as many customers as I can. The problem that I had with myself and what I've seen my peers do is we're doing it for us. We're doing it for I'm new to my job. I want to understand the customer. I want to make sure I know what to build into my 90-day, 6-month plan. That's not voice of the customer. That's me going to talk to some people to learn something. Voice of the customer has to be a structured, dedicated program that the company invests in. Like it being able to come into a board meeting and really share to the investors and to the business leaders what is happening on the street with our customers that's creating growth, churn. It could even be causing retention issues with our own employees if the employees have some kind of disconnect with what's happening with the customers. We see that all the time too. So the CMOs who are listening, I think that's great. Keep doing that. Go learn as much as you can about the customer, but that's not the voice of the customer. That voice of the customer is a strategic asset for a business. And that's what I think you and I are talking about when we talk about it being the second most important thing for businesses to
So
be
I
thinking about.
have to say this. You and I were talking about this. I loaded up 100 plus different transcripts of C suite executives that were talking about their top two challenges for creating long term sustainable growth and put it in a Claude project and started doing the analysis. I asked it a couple of questions and I said, come at this, please, from the point of view of the top ABM experts in the industry. And I gave some names and I said, act as like the chief strategy officer at Sixth Sense or Demand Base, like really evaluate this. One of the things that came out of it around voice of the customer, what they called insight decay. We can learn everything that you're talking about here. Those CMO conversations, the cab calls, the NPS surveys do it is a data point. The transcripts that come out of like from Gong or something from sales conversations. What happens is lots of times it lives in our heads. It might even make it into a strategy deck. But then what happens? Where is it all together? We learned a long time ago that digital transformation was, Deloitte called it the difference between the business of today and tomorrow. Today, we still deal with siloed, fragmented data. And even when we bring it together, if it's not brought together in the right way, it decays over time. Those insights are what drives the change management. Those insights are what drives strategic decision making. They drive product development. They drive our entire unique go-to-market strategy. How do we not lose? Once we do this, once we invest in this, how do we not lose it?
So brilliant. And the insight decay is real. Actually, one of the other things I've seen that just reflecting back on a client that I worked with, where we did a voice of the customer initiative to get the program going. And the executives didn't like what we came back with. They didn't like what their customers were saying. We collect a lot of information and we don't necessarily know what to do with it because we don't know how to structure it and analyze it and put it forward to that team that can make the decisions around what next. Or we don't like what the customer says because it flies in the face of what we think we should be going to do. And that we're not open to having challenging, critical conversations that might change the strategic direction of the company. So, the voice of the customer done right should cause a little stress. It should cause a conversation to occur that might make people uncomfortable. But that uncomfortable conversation could unlock something that is completely brand new to the market, that could blow the top off of whatever numbers you're trying to reach because you've made a breakthrough that you would never have thought of by yourself. So the voice of the customer is super interesting. Insight to cave, in my opinion, comes from I have too much and I don't know what to do with it, or I got it and I don't like it, so I'm gonna ignore it. And if that's both of those things, imagine what's inside.
I got to tell you, if we're not interested in the good, the bad, and the ugly, and understand what that means and what we need to do about it, we all have great ideas about moving our company forward. The last thing that we want to hear is that may not be the right way to go, that we may need to rethink what we're doing.
You can listen to it, you can have the critical conversation. You might not change your mind, you might not change the direction of your company, but at least you've really thought through that data. I encourage everybody to push on that. Let's actually look at this information and have it tell
Yes,
us what we can't
yes. Oh,
see.
I love it. Okay, we spent a lot of time talking. There's one area that I still really want to make sure that we at least touch on here. And the third challenge that came out of the report was that trust, both internally and externally, made the top three challenges of creating long term sustainable growth. What does trust mean to you? And why do you think that was in the top three?
That's not fair because I asked you that question earlier.
Right back
I
at you,
don't
Tracy.
remember that. So, um, so what trust means to me is really understanding where the other person is coming from and believing that they understand me. Trust is often freely given but quickly lost. And brands, people, all of us need to understand that trust is a mechanism to drive activity alignment so quickly. The more trust you have, both in the process and the people and the goal, the quicker everybody can move together towards whatever the outcome is. Trust to me is the absolute belief that we're all in it together. And that is internal, so across that C suite, and also externally with my clients, them with us, me with the brands I choose to do business with. There is a belief that I know what you're going to do, I know how you're going to do it, and I believe you're going to do it to the best of your ability to support our common
That's
goals.
not usually a sales conversation where you're being sold to. There's a reason why, and lack of trust. And I always say this stat, it came out of the most recent Edelman Trust Barometer 32,000 respondents worldwide. 68% of them thought that business leaders like you and I are being intentionally misleading. That is about the opposite of trust. Sales conversations have to be trust building conversations. We deliver and go back and forth on contracts and the contract negotiations and contract renewals. That's part of trust. Everything that we do, our brands are trust marks. We learned that in marketing 101 in the first year in college, if that's what we were doing. I love what you're doing here is you're framing it as I trust that you have my better interests in mind, and we're in this together, and we're going to figure it out. We collectively, internally and externally, are some pretty smart people, but when we all put our heads together, we're going to do great things. That's kind of my takeaway. I would like to ask you a 1 minute takeaway, which is we just covered so much territory here, so much territory. There's an entire series that comes out of this, and we only tackled the top three of the top 10 challenges. But if there was one thing that you wanted the C-suite executives that will be consuming this podcast to take away from our conversation, if nothing else, what would that be?
Oh man, Steve. One thing from this whole conversation, alignment is possible. Alignment is possible. It is not an impossible goal. It takes time, it takes trust, it takes accountability, and it takes clarity. Alignment is absolutely possible, and everybody should be striving to achieve it.
I have to tell you that I'm so excited about this conversation. The mission of this podcast was to bring C-suite executive perspectives and insights and experiences together all around B2B ABM. And how do we learn from each other, right? How do we glom that idea and this idea and that idea? And how do we put it together? And how do we learn from each other? If we can do that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. You were a super critical part of that rising tide today. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming on. You were amazing.
It's been fantastic. I hope that your listeners get some nugget out of this, and I hope that we get a chance to talk again.